Welcome to this video of Trinity United Church in Listowel and Atwood United Church. My name is Beth and I am delighted to be the new minister for these two congregations. This summer we are looking at spiritual practices for abundant living, even in a pandemic. And today we are focusing on sowing seeds. In addition to watching this video, you are warmly invited to join us on Sunday mornings at 10 a.m. on Zoom to further explore our theme each week. Our scripture today is from Matthew chapter 13, verses 1 to 9 and 18 to 23, read in the Message paraphrase. At about that time, Jesus left the house and sat on the beach. In no time at all, a crowd gathered along the shoreline, forcing him to get into a boat. Using the boat as a pulpit, he addressed his congregation, telling stories. "What do you make of this? A farmer planted seed. As he scattered the seeds, some of it fell on the road, and the birds ate it. Some fell in the gravel. It sprouted quickly but didn't put down roots. So when the sun came up, it withered just as quickly. Some fell in the weeds. As it came up, it was strangled by the weeds. Some fell on good earth and produced a harvest beyond his wildest dreams." Are you listening to this? Really listening? Study this story of the farmer planting seed. When anyone hears the news of the kingdom and doesn't take it in, it just remains on the surface. And so the evil one comes along and plucks it right out of that person's heart. This is the seed that the farmer scatters on the road. The seed cast in the gravel, this is the person who hears and instantly responds with enthusiasm. But there is no soil of character. And so when the emotions wear off and some difficulty arrives, there is nothing to show for it. The seed cast in the weeds is the person who hears the kingdom news, but the weeds of worry and illusions about getting more and wanting more strangle what was heard, and nothing comes of it. The seed cast on good earth is the person who hears and takes in the news, and then produces a harvest beyond his wildest dreams. May God bless to us these words from Scripture. Once upon a time, there was a farmer. She waited throughout the long winter, planning what she would grow when the spring finally came. Would she plant corn or beans or potatoes? Maybe she would plant different things in different fields. Then, as the days grew longer and the snow melted, she started to get ready for planting. She oiled all the moving parts on her tractor. She purchased seed and fertilizer. She watched the weather each day, waiting patiently for the day when she could get started on sowing her crop. Finally, everything was ready. It was time to sow some seeds. Out she went to her fields, but along the way she decided to sow some seeds on the road leading to the field. Other seeds she threw in the ditch along the side of the road, and still others were planted in a nearby wetland, and others in amongst the shelter belt of trees, where it was very shady, and the tree roots took all the nutrients from the soil. Her neighbors watched in horror, saying to one another, "What on earth is she doing?" Yes, some of her seed was planted in her fields, but much of the rest of it was wasted in places where you could never expect a good crop to grow. This was definitely not the way to do things. Because it is Jesus telling the story and because it is in the Bible, we might miss what any farmer in Jesus' day would have noticed straight away about this parable. The farmer in this story is doing a terrible job of planting seeds. No self-respecting farmer sows seeds on the road and in the ditches and other places where seeds are not expected to grow well. Seed is way too valuable for that. In fact, ancient farmers and their modern counterparts in many parts of the world today, who still sow seeds by hand, can be even more precise about where they are putting their precious seeds than farmers who use modern machinery. But whether you are sowing by hand or by machine, a wise farmer puts as little seed as possible in environments where it is not expected to grow. Yet here we have a story about a farmer who sows indiscriminately, in places where the farmer might expect seeds to grow well, and in a lot of places where it isn't likely to grow well at all. Obviously, when a farmer plants a seed, they cannot know for sure that it will grow. No one knows what will happen in terms of rainfall and sunshine, weeds and hailstorms. Still, this is not smart farming technique. So like many of the stories Jesus told, this story is meant to have people going, "Say what?" when they hear it. Why would a farmer ever do that? In the version that we have to consider today in Matthew's Gospel, there is both a story and an interpretation of it. They are separated in the 13th chapter of Matthew by a brief discussion that Jesus has with his disciples about why he teaches using stories, or parables as they're called. Most biblical scholars believe that only the story itself, the story about the farmer sowing the seeds, might have originated with Jesus, and that the later interpretation is not something likely that Jesus said at all. The story of the crazy farmer was probably part of an oral tradition of stories of Jesus shared by the early followers of his way until it was written down by the gospel writers a couple of decades after Jesus' death. So while the precise words are not likely the ones Jesus used, this basic story might well be. However, the interpretation of the story as being about how the good news of Jesus does or does not grow in the heart of believers is likely much later and a product of the early Christian community in which Matthew's gospel was written. It's their attempt to understand this strange and perplexing story in a way that makes sense for a fledgling community of faith like theirs. Their interpretation isn't wrong or unhelpful. In fact, I think the idea that some seeds grow and others don't ever take root, while others grow fast but get choked out or scorched by the sun, is a helpful image for us when we think about the ways in which faith can grow in our lives and in our community. This interpretation of the parable of Jesus is a valuable gift we receive from the early Christian church. However, it is not the only possible interpretation of the original parable. All good stories work on many levels and can say many different things in many different contexts. It's part of what makes the fact that Jesus taught primarily with stories so significant. So today I want to invite us to think a little bit about the implications of the farmer's strange sowing technique. Why does the farmer sow seeds everywhere? And what purpose does this detail serve in this story? I think this story invites us to think about what kind of seed sowers we are. You see, in my experience, God sows seeds like the farmer in this story, indiscriminately, everywhere, especially in places where everyone else is convinced that nothing will ever grow. God specializes in planting seeds in the lives of those who seem unqualified, ill-prepared, and unlikely candidates for the work of God in the world. Sometimes it doesn't work out for God. Sometimes the people say no when God asks them to serve. Some seeds just don't sprout, and other seeds sprout but get choked out by weeds. But other times, the harvest is amazing. Lives are transformed, hope is restored, love is growing. Even, or perhaps especially, in places that seemed hostile and infertile at first glance, where no one but God would have thought it was a good idea to plant anything. And I think God also invites us to sow seeds generously in the world. Many of us have been taught to be cautious about the kinds of seeds we sow. We don't want to invest our time, energy, and resources on people or situations that in our best estimation are unlikely to yield a rich harvest. We've been taught that the measure of success as individuals and as communities of faith is how big the harvest is, not how many seeds we have sown. And so we are reluctant to sow seeds in the ditches and along the roadways and amid the shelter belt. We look for some assurance that our efforts will likely yield a good outcome before we're willing to sow any seeds at all. However, that's not how God works. God bets on long shots and lost causes. God offers grace lavishly. God can make a seed grow even when it has to push through pavement and concrete. When evaluated by the standards of the world, just like this farmer's farming practice, God's ways seem foolish and unwise. For a number of years, I was on the family selection committee for the Portage La Prairie Habitat for Humanity chapter. Each year we would take applications from families hoping to move into a newly built home with no down payment required and an interest-free mortgage geared to income. The goal was to give families who would not qualify for a conventional mortgage a hand up by helping them to achieve safe, stable, and adequate housing for their families. We saw a lot of horrendous housing situations when we visited homes, mobile homes, and apartments as part of the interview process. It was almost universally true in Portage, and is probably true here, that families working for minimum wage or slightly above it had a very difficult time finding a decent house or apartment that they could afford. From families of 5 living in one-bedroom apartments, to mold growing in bathrooms, to stoves that didn't work that the landlord had no interest in ever fixing, to roofs that leaked. We saw a lot of atrocious housing. Rarely did anyone apply who wasn't in need of better housing. What was harder to assess was whether families were ready for home ownership. Did they have a stable enough work situation? Would they be able to maintain the house? How was their credit score? Even with doing our best diligence, sometimes we got it right, and families thrived in their new homes. And at least once that I know of, it really did not work out, and that house has boarded up windows now. As I've been reflecting on this scripture this week, I wonder if God's criteria for offering people houses might have been different than ours was. Would God have cared at all if people were ready for home ownership? Would God have assessed families solely based on need? Would God have challenged us to figure out how to offer more housing to more people in need, rather than just one house on average a year? What would God have had to say about an economic system that kept so many people in poverty, even while working full-time in many cases? Now, I think there is wisdom in thinking about how to help people in incremental ways that are truly helpful. It doesn't make sense to sign a new runner up to run a marathon. They simply aren't ready for that. And the same can be true about helping someone to find a job or own a house or start a business. One of the things we identified partway through my time with Habitat was the need for a walkthrough with families and someone from the building committee a few months after they took possession, to help them remember household maintenance things like furnace filters that tended to get lost in the excitement of a brand new house. Many of Habitat's homeowners were the first in their families to ever own a home, and so they did not have access to the expertise about what you need to do to keep a home in good running order. Just throwing someone into the deep end isn't the best way to help them learn how to swim. Still, I think we are called to be generous seed sowers. We are called to let go of the myth that some people are more worthy of our help than others. All people are worthy of aid simply by virtue of being human and being in need. Absolutely, some of the seeds we sow will fall on rocky soil and not grow. Others will be choked out by weeds and dried out by the hot summer sun. But by God's grace, in ways we may not ever fully understand, some of them will grow into a harvest beyond our wildest dreams. It reminds me of a poem called Anyways that Mother Teresa had inscribed into the wall of her children's home in Calcutta. This poem is a modification of an earlier poem by Kent Keith, written in 1968, called The Paradoxical Commandments. The author of the revisions found in Mother Teresa's version is unknown, but her version goes like this. People are often unreasonable, illogical, and self-centered. Forgive them anyway. If you are kind, people may accuse you of selfish, ulterior motives. Be kind anyway. If you are successful, you will win some false friends and some true enemies. Succeed anyway. If you are honest and frank, people may cheat you. Be honest and frank anyway. What you spend years building, someone could destroy overnight. Build anyway. If you find serenity and happiness, they may be jealous. Be happy anyway. The good you do today People will often forget tomorrow. Do good anyway. Give the world the best you have, and it may never be enough. Give the world the best you've got anyway. You see, in the final analysis, it is between you and your God. It was never between you and them anyway. So this week, take a chance and sow some seeds. Offer kindness to someone without inquiring about whether they are worthy or not. Don't worry about how likely your seeds are to grow. Just plant them and leave the rest to God. Who knows? They might produce a harvest beyond your wildest dreams. Thanks be to God. Amen.